Thank you all for being here, and I want to thank the legislators that have joined us even at this very late hour. As you all know, we began our work on February the 14th with the first special session, and many thought it was an insurmountable challenge. We inherited $1 billion deficit for the current fiscal year and more than $2 billion for the fiscal year that begins on July 1st, the largest in the state's history. The TOPS program, K-12 education, higher education, life-saving health care services, and many other areas of state government were threatened with catastrophic cuts if we didn't take swift, decisive action. I offered a specific plan to address the problems left over from the previous administration. This plan would have fully funded our critical priorities and started us coming out of this hole that we had been left in. Today, some of us can look back on these two special sessions and the intervening regular session knowing that we did everything that we possibly could, everything within our power to work in good faith, to compromise, to find common ground and avoid catastrophic cuts. And to a very large degree, we were successful. And that's because a clear majority of the legislators worked with us in that same fashion. But certainly not everyone in the legislature can say that. There is a relatively small group, mostly in the House, who did everything in their power to block just about every attempt that we made to find common ground and to raise the revenue necessary to fund critically important priorities. And I can't explain their motives. I won't try. Doesn't really matter. But I hope the people of Louisiana recognize that there are a few folks in the legislature more interested in continuing the policies of the past administration and playing games we often see in Washington, perhaps to hurt me politically, but certainly not in the interest of moving Louisiana forward. Now, I've offered numerous ways to fix the budget crisis over the past several months, and there were some folks who just simply wouldn't offer a single avenue of their own. They refused revenue and refused to be associated with cuts. So they, by definition, were certainly part of the problem. So I challenged them time and again to offer their own plans to address the historic problem. But they simply offered a one-word answer, and that was no. But at the end of the day, I have to tell you that I am very proud of the vast majority of legislators who have done truly an amazing job of working with me, because we have been able to a very large degree to stabilize our budget and avoid catastrophic cuts. This is where we stand. In the first special session, I cut spending in the current fiscal year by more than $230 million and implemented efficiencies across state government. For the next fiscal year, we brought a $2 billion deficit down to about $320 million, and yes, that will be made up in cuts. And in the process of expanding the Medicaid for the state of Louisiana, we will save $180 million of state general fund for next year. And yes, to meet that difference, we raised about $1.5 billion in revenue. Now, sadly, despite the fact that much of our problem is structural in nature, and it goes as far as the eye can see in terms of our structural budget deficit, the revenue that we raised, especially there in the first special session, was temporary in nature. It was short-term, and clearly the credit rating agencies didn't appreciate that particular approach. But all of that said, in just over 4 months, through relentless focus on honest budgeting, together we have corrected more than $2 billion in deficits left to us largely by the dishonest and irresponsible budgeting practices of the previous administration. And the budget that I propose and the budget that we have, there's no one-time money. There are no fund sweeps. We did not raid the Transportation Trust Fund. And until tonight, there was no contingent funding. We didn't resort to that old trick with above-the-line funding and below-the-line funding until tonight. And the reason the contingent funding is such a problem is because it directs all revenue in excess of what's going to be recognized by REC after we sign these bills into law to go to one of three areas: The problem with that is we've been put on notice by the state's economists that we face a shortfall in the current fiscal year, and it's probably going to be $200 million or more that gets carried into next fiscal year and has to be paid up front. And so the legislature to tell me that I have to pay all of that extra revenue to higher education, to TOPS, or to health care, it interferes with my constitutional obligation to pay that debt. Secondly, we have a cash flow problem, something that I know the legislature was aware of because I put them on notice in my talk to the legislature on the first day. And there is every possibility that we're going to have to take out a loan to pay regular, ordinary bills of the state of Louisiana to deal with that cash flow problem. If all of the extra revenue has to go to those three areas, who's going to loan us the money? Absolutely irresponsible. Further than that, we are in hurricane season, and we all know what that can look like. Even when we, on the back end of a disaster, get the federal government to put up money, it is only 75%, and they repay us. We have to front all of the money. That's why you don't do contingent budgeting. That's why it is irresponsible. And the implication of front-loading TOPS so that we fully fund the first semester, but leave kids with as much as $2,500 towards their tuition in the second semester is really problematic, especially because normal avenues for student financial assistance are not available at that time of year. So again, not the best policy, not responsible.